Hi, you're watching Floyd Steinberg's YouTube channel.
Hi, you're watching Floyd Steinberg's YouTube channel.
So, between the years, I posted a poll on my channel, and the question was if you know how a sampler or rumpler actually changes the pitch of a sample once it's been captured. And the point there is that a sampler is a computer, and computers have CPUs, and CPUs are running at a fixed frequency, as does the digital analog converter that's built into these machines, also running at a fixed frequency. So how do you change the pitch of a recording after it's been captured at a fixed frequency when everything inside the machine is running at a fixed frequency? 50% of you answered, I know the answer to this question. Another 50% answered, I don't know the answer to this question. And of the people who answered the question in the comments, I think half of them got it right, half of them got it wrong. So today, let's take a look at your answers and how it actually works. And if you think that's an interesting topic for a video, please join me in the next minutes. Here we go. So one of you suggested that there's a small helium valve inside the samplers, and depending on the note you play, more or less helium gets injected into the system, thus changing the pitch of the sound.
But would that really work? Well, to understand that, we have to take a look at physics. In helium, sound travels roughly 3 times faster than in normal air. However, this does not change the pitch of the sound, but only its wavelength. The pitch we hear is bound to frequency, not wavelength. The frequency of the membrane of the speaker does not change as we submerge it in helium, and as the sound waves reach normal air, their wavelength changes, but not their frequency. So, why does helium change the pitch of a human voice, you ask? Yeah, that's because the human voice is a combination of a fundamental frequency and formants. Formants are the resonating parts of your voice, which interact with the air or helium directly. The medium change shifts those resonances upwards. Because the human voice is dominated by the formants, we perceive this as a pitch change. The same would happen to a reed instrument like a clarinet. Here, both the reed and the resonator react dynamically to the medium therein, so submerging the instrument in helium would indeed change its pitch. A loudspeaker, however, is driven by an electric signal that's independent of the medium it's in. So submerging it in helium would not change the pitch of a sound but only its resonance, which would sound a bit like a high-pass filter, but in reality it's a formant shift upwards. I had ordered a bottle of helium to show this in real life, but as it always is, it didn't arrive in time. If you want me to add a YouTube short once it arrives, please post a comment under this video.
Another view suggested samplers use the Doppler effect. That means moving the sound source towards the microphone or the audio capture device would change the pitch of the sound. So let's test that.
You know the Doppler effect from police cars or fire trucks driving by. While they're approaching, the signal is heard at a higher pitch than they're driving away from you, because of the compression effect caused by the sound source moving towards you. In order to illustrate this, I moved my sampler across a microphone as fast as I could, while holding down a key. It's hard to hear because of that popping sound when passing the mic, but there's a tiny pitch shift there that's barely perceptible. Conclusion. Using the Doppler effect is possible on paper, but it's not practicable in real life. The formula for the pitch change of the Doppler effect is F equals F0 times C divided by C minus V. So if we wanted to change the pitch by 1 semitone, we'd need to move our sampler at 73 km per hour towards our listener, which not only limits our artistic expression, but also puts in danger the lives of our audience.
Another viewer had the idea to change gravity locally, which changes the flow of time, because gravity changes space-time. And changing time locally means changing frequency perceived in another space. So let's put that to the test.
Okay, I'm not going into the mathematics of this one, but for a hypothetical gravity pitch shift by 1 semitone, you'd need to increase Earth's gravity by tens of millions of times, which effectively would wipe out all of humanity. So using such a synth is not a good idea if you want to extend your social media reach.
Final side, how does this work? Well, to explain that we have to understand how we as humans perceive pitches and what a recording actually is and what a sample is inside a computer.
Well, you had some answers to this and some of you got it right, but some of you viewed the whole problem far too academical. Remember, samplers existed in the late 70s and CPU power was tiny compared to what we have today. Yet, those devices had no problem at all changing the pitch of a recording in real time. So how did they do it? Well, in order to understand this, you need to understand what a recording is. When we record sound, we are measuring air pressure at a point in time. A microphone is a device that converts air pressure into an electrical signal. The air pressure change causes a movement in the microphone, which is enough to create a tiny electrical signal. This then is amplified, and the resulting voltage is measured by the analog to digital converter, resulting in a number that depends on the bit depth of your ADC, or analog to digital converter. Let's assume we're working at CD quality audio, that is 16-bit depth and 44.1 kHz in frequency. This means we're measuring voltage 44,100 times per second, and the resulting numbers can range from negative 32,768 to positive 32,767, representing positive and negative air pressure, or 0 for no changes at all. There are some finer details to consider here, like aperture size or the length of the time we measure voltage, but for now this information should suffice. In your sampler, these values then get normalized to floating point values in the range from -1 to +1. What we end up with is a table of numbers, a very long table of numbers. For example, at 44.1 kHz, you'll need 882,000 bytes for 10 seconds of mono audio, because 16 bits are 2 bytes. So that's 861 kilobytes there. I've made a simple PlugData patch that shows the idea. PlugData is a visual programming language that lets me place simple audio processing tools on a grid and connect them with wires, and we won't go deeper into this here. Here I just pre-record a sample into a predefined memory space called an array. Once I've loaded the sample, I have a big table of numbers representing air pressure changes over time. So when I play this back, the computer sends a list of numbers to the DAC, or the digital analog converter, which converts the numbers to electric voltages again, and ultimately a loudspeaker converts the voltages to air pressure changes by moving a membrane back and forth. The speed at which the DAC moves through this table of numbers is fixed. We can't change it. Before I finally tell you how we can change the pitch of a recording now, there's one last piece to the puzzle. We humans perceive pitch in an exponential way. As a rule of thumb, doubling a frequency raises pitch by an octave. For example, changing pitch from 200 Hz to 400 Hz to us is the same distance as changing from 1000 to 2000 Hz. Both is an octave to us, but in raw numbers the latter is a much bigger frequency shift. Now back to our table of samples. What happens if we skip every second row and send data thinned out this way to the DAC? In my simple program here, the pointer that reads the contents of the table is driven by a ramp that simply counts from 0 to 44,100. And if I multiply each value in this ramp by 2, I'll tell the computer to read only every second sample. And here's the result of that. And as you see, the pitch has changed by an octave and the duration of the sample has been halved. So we didn't change the speed of the playback or the frequency of the DAC, we just thinned out the data we transfer in the most basic way. So what about semitone steps then? For this we need to multiply the frequency by 2 to the power of 1/12. So for a pitch shift of 1 semitone, we need to multiply the position of a reed head by 1.0594. So the first sample we read is at 0, the next one is at 1.0594, the next is at 2.118, then at 3.17, and so on. Now, as we are moving through the table, the line numbers are integers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. There is no sample at line number 1.0594, so we need to round the results to the closest integer. So the sampler in this case will play back most of the samples if we shift by semitone, but it will skip roughly every 17th value. When pitching down, we will do the opposite. The sample will start repeating certain values, in this case every 17th value. Of course, changing pitch in this very simple way will introduce a lot of artifacts in the audio you hear. So as CPU power and RAM size increased in the 90s, manufacturers could come up with some strategies to improve the resulting audio quality. One of those strategies in the early 90s was linear interpolation. Here you look at the number that points at the table of samples, for example 1.059. This falls between the numbers 1 and 2, but it's closer to 1 than to 2. So we will not weigh them equally, we'll multiply the first value by 0.941 and the second one by 0.059, and then we'll add the result together. The graphical interpretation of this is drawing a straight line between both samples and measuring its value at the given point and sending that to the DAC. The resulting sound is much better than just repeating the nearest sample, but it's also effectively a low-pass filter. Why is that? Because high-pitched sounds change erratically in their waveform, and we're smoothing out those curves, cutting a lot away of the detail of the faster movements, so to speak. That's why older samplers have that characteristic muffled sound to them if you pitch the note up. Today's samplers can use increasingly complex mathematics to avoid this problem. One algorithm that gives good enough results without eating a lot of CPU cycles is cubic interpolation. Here, instead of 2 neighboring samples, we read 4 and then try to guess the wave shape that fits, so to speak. The actual math for this is surprisingly light, so it won't tax your CPU too much. We determine the 4 neighboring samples of a reed head, so to speak. For example, in this accordion sample, if we pitch it up by a semitone, the first sample we need is located at 1.083, as seen previously. We'll now read the 2 samples neighboring that point, as we did in linear interpolation. But we'll also read the sample before that and the sample after that. So in our example, we have these values in a table here. For a calculation, we'll use only the first 4 samples and we'll name them x0 to x3. Now, we'll feed this into a relatively simple mathematical algorithm. First, we need to calculate some coefficients or helper numbers, a0 to a3, with these formulas. And now, we will fill in our sample data, which results in these numbers. And now, we will feed these values into this formula. F here is a frequency change, which is a semitone or 1/12 of an octave. So let's insert 1/12 for all Fs here. And now we can just calculate that, and the result is 0.00786613. And for comparison, a linear interpolation would have given us 0.00791. The graphical depiction of cubic interpolation is guessing a curve that fits. As you can see here, the linear interpolation is mathematically much lighter than the cubic one, but the cubic one is more detailed. Here's how they sound in comparison. I've loaded an acoustic guitar sample here and will now play it back with no interpolation. With linear interpolation, and with cubic interpolation. So, that's how samplers and romplers change pitch. In essence, it's the number of rows a pointer to a segment of memory inside the computer jumps with each step. Back in the 80s, the arrival of relatively cheap random access memory was the game changer here. RAM, opposed to other methods of data storage, is wired to a CPU directly, and due to its architecture, each address in RAM can be addressed at the same speed. So the process of give me the value in the table row 63 is very easy to do for a CPU. It involves no calculations. Linear interpolation requires 2 multiplications and 1 addition, while cubic interpolation requires 12 additions and 6 multiplications per sample.
Yeah, and that's it for today. I hope you found this video interesting, and if you did, please do the YouTube thing. You can also support this channel on Patreon or by becoming a YouTube channel member, or by listening to my music on Bandcamp or Spotify or Apple Music, whatever. But of course, none of this is mandatory. As always, thanks for watching, and see you again very, very soon. Bye bye.